When it comes to losing body fat, we have several tools at our disposal. As trainers, we have steady state cardio. We have interval training. We have strongman medleys. But weight training itself does play a role when it comes to losing fat. Sadly, most people use it the wrong way. They use weight training for its least important element, and by doing so, they actually run the risk of short-circuiting their progress. What I'm saying is that you don't use weight training as a way to burn more calories. That's a mistake. Here's why you're using lifting in a fat loss program, okay? First, it's for muscle mass maintenance or even to increase muscle mass, okay? Each pound of muscle will burn an extra 15 to 25 calories per day. So if you're gaining 10 pounds of muscle, you will expend 150 to 150 calories more per day. By extension, if you're losing 10 pounds of muscle because you don't train with weights and you're cutting your calories, because it's been shown that if you don't train with weights and you are reducing calories, as high as 50% of the weight you're losing is muscle mass. If I'm losing 10 pounds of muscle, then I will burn less calories at rest, making it harder to keep losing body fat. So the first purpose of strength training is to at least maintain muscle mass when you are reducing calories, ideally increasing muscle mass slightly. Now, the second reason why you are weight training when you want to lose fat, or why weight training is important for losing fat, is that weight training will increase insulin sensitivity, both in the short term around the workout and also in the long run. Now, insulin sensitivity, why is that important? Because if you are more insulin sensitive and you are eating a meal, especially a meal containing carbs, well, you're producing insulin. That's the storage hormone. Now, insulin will not make you fat. That is a misconception, okay? Insulin, if I'm eating 500 calories, I will eventually store that 500 calories. Now, if I have more insulin, I might store it a bit faster, but I'm not getting fatter because of the insulin. I would store that energy anyway. But insulin, if I'm resistant, it means my cells are not responding efficiently to insulin. As a result, I will produce more insulin, and if I produce more insulin, it takes a lot longer to get back down to normal level. Why is that important? Because as long as insulin is elevated, my body is not efficient at losing fat, at mobilizing stored fat for fuel. So if I'm insulin sensitive and I'm eating, my insulin doesn't spike up as much and it goes back down really quickly. I'm spending more time being good at mobilizing fat. If it stays high, I'm spending more time not being good at mobilizing fat. So it makes it harder to lose fat. It doesn't make me gain more fat. It makes it harder to lose the fat. Okay? So weight training will increase insulin sensitivity. Why? Well, you have the GLUT4 activation that actually will make it easier for the muscles to increase carbohydrates uptake. That's one thing. That's sciencey, that's cool. But it's much simpler than that. When you weight train, you will burn muscle glycogen for fuel, carbohydrates stored in the muscle. Now, I will use the overhead bin analogy. If you're traveling by plane, you know they have overhead bins where you store your carry-on luggage. Now, if the overhead bins have a lot of room in them, it's very easy to put your carry-on luggage in there. But if it's full already, you're gonna have to push and tug and push and squeeze to be able to get that carry-on in there. The more room there is, the easier it is to store. Same thing goes with your muscle cells. If I have more room to store glycogen because my stores are not full, it's easy for me to store what I eat inside the muscle. So if it's easy, I don't need to produce as much insulin. If it's full already, my body will have a very hard time storing carbs in muscle. But my body panics because if I cannot store carbs, my blood sugar stays elevated, which is dangerous. So my body, in the interest of avoiding that hyperglycemia, it will produce a shit ton more of insulin to force those nutrients to get inside those muscles or inside the fat cells. So the more room I have, the easier it is, the less insulin I produce. So when I'm burning sugar, when I'm lifting weights, I'm creating room inside the muscle, making it easier to store the carbs I'm eating, thus not needing to produce as much insulin. By extension, if I increase the size of my muscles, I'm also creating more space to store glycogen. So that's why strength training is helpful by increasing insulin sensitivity. Another purpose is the lactate you will produce. If I'm using glycogen for fuel with sets lasting 40, 50, 60 seconds under tension, I will also produce a lot of lactic acid. Lactic acid being the byproduct of using carbs for fuel. Now, that lactic acid, besides having anabolic properties on its own, it's also been shown to increase the level of growth hormone. Now, contrary to what the name implies, growth hormone in an adult male serves more as an hormone that will release fatty acid so you can burn them for fuel. So if you produce more lactic acid, I will actually release more fatty acids in the bloodstream to be used for fuel. That's not a huge benefit. Most of the benefits from strength training comes from the increase in insulin sensitivity and the maintenance of muscle mass, but every little bit counts. Now, the big problem I see with people who are trying to get lean is that they try to burn more calories with weight training, increasing the volume dramatically. And I understand the logic. I want to get lean. I want to burn as much gas as possible. So if I'm doing 30 sets instead of 15, I'm of course burning more fuel. Here's the problem, because if the more volume you do, the more cortisol you release. Cortisol's purpose when you're lifting, when you're training, is to mobilize stored energy. So the more volume you do, the more energy you're using, the more cortisol you release. Right, I understand that. The problem is that cortisol is also anti-anabolic. If it's too high, it will greatly reduce how much muscle you can build. It will slow down recovery from training. And if it's chronically elevated over the long run, it could actually make it harder to gain muscle by decreasing the conversion of T4 thyroid into T3 thyroid, slowing down your metabolic rate. So if cortisol is always high because you're doing too much volume, it's going to be really hard to recover from training. You might actually lose muscle because you're training too much. You will burn down the nervous system. That's a different topic, but let's just take my word for it right now. And you will also potentially decrease metabolic rate over the long run if its cortisol is chronically elevated. Not a good thing. So by doing too much work, you might actually have a negative impact on body composition, unless you're on drugs. But I'm assuming that most of you watching this are not on drugs. So when you're talking about weight training and body composition, fat loss, it's mostly about muscle maintenance or even muscle gain. It's also about making you more insulin sensitive. But too much volume will come back to bite you in the ass. So don't make that mistake.